Hi everybody. In this video, we're going to talk about evaluating inductive arguments, no matter what form they are, and no matter how many premises there are. We're going to learn about the procedure for evaluating an inductive argument. And evaluating an argument simply means how to tell whether it's any good or not, and whether it passes the logic test and the truth test. And so these are the concepts we are going to be utilizing here. They're known as strength and cogency. So when evaluating inductive arguments, again, we use the concepts of strength and cogency. And basically, strength refers to the structure or form of the argument, the logic of the argument. And cogency refers to the truth or acceptability of its content. So these are just definitions, textbook definitions here, and we'll work through some of this. So an inductive argument is said to be strong when, if the premises are true, the conclusion is probably true. And an inductive argument said to be cogent when it's strong and has all true or acceptable premises, which is going to give it most likely a true conclusion. Not necessarily, but likely. So this means that when you're evaluating an inductive argument, you got three possible answers, right? It's either going to be strong and cogent, which means it passes the logic test and it passes the truth test. It could be strong but uncogent, which means it passes the logic test but fails somewhere on the truth test. Or it could be weak, which automatically makes it uncogent. It means that if it failed on the logic, it automatically fails the whole thing. It's to be tossed, right? So in other words, there's no such thing as a weak but cogent argument. So let me just draw this out. You've got two possibilities here, right? It could be strong logically or weak logically. Once you've determined that it's strong, we're going to go through all of this, but I just wanted to put this image in your head. If the logic is good or strong, it can be, the argument can be either cogent or uncogent. But if you decide that the logic of the argument is weak, it's automatically uncogent. Okay, good. Now, one last thing I want to show you while we're here on this whiteboard area is that strength can come in a matter of degrees. Let's say that this is 1 and this is 10. And let's say that this is the dividing line, right? Let's say that I'm going to erase this stuff for now. Okay, so 1 and 10. This is where you might consider the argument weak, and then here's where you'd consider it strong, right? So my point here is that you can have an argument that falls to the weak side. In other words, the conclusion doesn't follow with likelihood or probably from the premises. So it can be just on the weak side, or it can be mega weak, right? But you just call it weak. But in reality, there are gradations of weakness. But you got to settle on a concept, right? Same with strength. If you're going to say that, hey, the conclusion would follow probably from these premises, it could just be relatively strong, or stronger, or stronger, or really strong, right? But again, strength comes in degrees. So, but we'll just go ahead and call it all of these strong. Hopefully that made sense. Okay. How to test an inductive argument for strength and cogency. So we're going to walk through this procedure, and then we'll put it to work. So first step is you look at the argument. Always what you ought to do is standardize it. There's a reason we were standardizing arguments. First and foremost, separate the conclusion out. So notice that I'm inserting something here, right? I'm talking before you start this procedure. Find your conclusion. Separate it. Articulate the premises. So in other words, standardize your argument. Set it up for evaluation. Then, once you've done that, here's what you do. You assume that the premises are true. What that means is that no matter how objectionable or ridiculous those propositions may seem to you, just pretend like they're true for a minute. Just don't question their truth value. In other words, just say to yourself, if each of these premises were true, would the conclusion follow probably from them? So that's into step 2. Determine whether the conclusion would follow probably from the assumed truth of the premises. If it would, even just relatively, probably, if that makes any sense, then the argument can be considered strong. If it doesn't, then the argument is weak. And again, if an inductive argument is weak, then it's automatically uncogent. Then on to step 3. If and only if the argument is strong, examine the truth value of the premises. Are they all, in fact, true? And if they are, then the argument is cogent as well. And then step 4 is for premises that are backed up by a sub-argument, repeat all those steps for the sub-arguments. But this is stuff that we'll talk about when the time is right and when we're actually doing this in papers. Okay. So here's some examples together. So 95% of all women love monster truck rallies. And Jessica is a woman, so Jessica probably loves monster truck rallies. You would just pretend for a second that that's true. Pretend for a second that that's true. And then ask yourself, if those were true, would this conclusion follow with likelihood? And the answer is yeah. If these two were true, then it's probably true that I'm going to love monster truck rallies as well. That means this argument is strong. Since it's strong, you move on to cogency, and you ask yourself, is premise 1 in fact true? Is it true that 95% of all women love monster truck rallies? Nope. That's in fact false. Although premise 2 is true. There's the one premise you need to make this argument uncogent. So although strong, this argument is uncogent. Good. Next, most schnauzers make good watchdogs, and Sonny and Bobby are schnauzers. Therefore, Sonny and Bobby are good watchdogs. Let's go through that procedure again. So at first, you look at the argument. I mean, you might not even know anything. You might not even know what a schnauzer is, let alone whether or not it makes a good watchdog. It doesn't matter when you're testing the logic. It doesn't matter when you're in the strength phase, right? You just go, okay, whatever that thing is, and whether or not it's a good watchdog, I'm just going to go with it. Okay, true. And Sonny and Bobby are schnauzers. I've never heard of them, don't even know what a schnauzer is, but let's just go with it. Right? True. Then you ask yourself, if these two were true, is it likely that Sonny and Bobby are going to be good watchdogs? And the answer is yes. Now, is it necessarily the case? No, but we're dealing with induction. It just needs to be probably the case. So, assuming these two premises are true, the conclusion would follow, probably. So this bottom argument is strong. Then you go back and you do the cogency test. And you say, is it true that most schnauzers make good watchdogs? So, Jay, if you don't know that, it's no worries because you just look it up, right? Google it. Are schnauzers good watchdogs, right? This, in fact, turns out to be true. It's just bred into them. It's a feature of their breed. Not guard dogs, but watchdogs. They bark when things alert them. And so that's true. Premise 2, Sonny and Bobby are schnauzers. I can attest to that. They're my schnauzers, so that's true. Okay, so take the parentheses out. That's true. So it's likely to be true that the conclusion follows. But more importantly, the argument's strong, and both premises are true, which makes the argument cogent. Okay, so here are some examples and answer slides, and we'll pause so that you can reflect a little while we're going through. Anthony Davis, who goes to the local Mormon church, was arrested for car theft. Kay White, who attends a different Mormon church, was arrested for embezzlement. Conclusion: Mormons are just a bunch of criminals. So I'll speak through this one just to walk you through it. First, just noting, this is a generalization. You're drawing a conclusion about all Mormons based on a sample of Mormons. So it's a generalization, but more importantly to this video is let's evaluate it for strength and cogency, which means that we're going to assume that this is true, and then ask if this conclusion would likely be true as well. So for a second, you just pretend that there's some dude named Anthony Davis who goes to the local Mormon church, got arrested for car theft. Assume there's some woman named Kay White, goes to a different Mormon church, was arrested for embezzlement. If those two are true, is it a likelihood? Is it fair to draw the conclusion that Mormons are just a bunch of criminals? Does this conclusion follow with likelihood? And then you would determine whether the argument is strong or weak based on this. And then if you come up with strong, you got to check for cogency. If you decide that it's weak, it's automatically uncogent. That example was weak because the conclusion did not follow with likelihood from the premise. And it was uncogent because it was weak. The chief medical examiner at the LA coroner's office determined that Michael Jackson died of acute propofol and lorazepam intoxication. Therefore, it would seem to follow that Jackson did indeed die from these causes. By the way, this is an argument from authority because it's using an authority or an expert to justify the conclusion. So just go with it for a minute, pretend like this is absolute truth, and ask yourself if it's reasonable, or to draw this conclusion. In other words, would this conclusion follow probably if that premise was true? Answer is strong, because the conclusion would follow probably from the premise. And it's cogent as well, because the premise was, in fact, true. It is true that this expert made this determination. So that's how we know it's cogent. Like I said, sometimes you got to look this stuff up. Right? We don't always, all of us don't know everything right off the spot. You don't need an encyclopedia or Google or any fact check machine to figure out strength or weakness, though. You just need to understand what strength and weakness are. When it comes to cogency, though, that's a fact checking matter, and you may need to look it up. Most men love eyelash extension parties, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is a man, so it's safe to conclude that he loves eyelash extension parties. Assume it's true for a minute. Assume it's true for a minute. And if these two are true, does this conclusion follow with likelihood? Is it safe to conclude that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson would love eyelash extension parties if he's a man and most men love them? So this argument was strong because the conclusion probably follows from the premises, but it's uncogent because the first premise was or is false, right? If you assume this is true and assume this is true, that would follow. Good, strong. So then that means green light. You check for cogency. Is this true in fact? No. Premise 2 is true. So although strong, this argument is uncogent. And I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. Okay, next. The kids in the first grade class loved the movies Toy Story and Finding Nemo. But Saw is just as good of a movie as those two. I bet the kids will love Saw just as well. By the way, this is an argument by analogy. So now we do the process. Assume that's true. Assume that's true. If those two are true, would this follow? Can you make that conclusion or draw that conclusion with likelihood? This one happens to be weak because the conclusion does not follow with likelihood from the premises, and it's uncogent because it's weak. Weak, hence uncogent. It's weak because, let me explain why, because you're saying that the kids okay, fine, there's some kids in a first grade class, they loved these two movies. But Saw is just as good a movie. But notice what's being compared here. You got two like Pixar movies, and then the analogy or the analog that's being used is something completely different from these two. It doesn't have enough, this movie doesn't have enough in common with these movies to serve as a good analogy. That's what makes the argument weak, hence uncogent. My neighbor went out to get his paper at 5 in the morning today, so he'll probably do the same thing tomorrow morning. Pretend it's true for a minute. Of you or me or whomever. If it's true that your neighbor went out to get his paper at 5 in the morning today, are you warranted to draw the conclusion that he's probably going to do the same thing tomorrow morning? Again, test for strength and then cogency. This one happened to be weak because the conclusion does not follow with likelihood from the premises, and uncogent because it's weak. Weak, hence uncogent. And then to go back, even if we assume that, let's say I have a neighbor who goes out to get his paper at 5 in the morning, and he did it today. Hey, my neighbor went out at 5 this morning to get his paper. Can you draw this conclusion based on just one instance? No. So the conclusion doesn't follow with likelihood. It doesn't mean it's not possible. It's possible that he will. But again, are you logically warranted to say that he'll probably do it again tomorrow based on one example? The answer is no. Now, my neighbor went out to get his paper at 5 in the morning every day for the last year. So he'll probably do the same thing tomorrow morning. Let's pretend that's true. Based on the assumed truth of this premise, can you draw that conclusion with likelihood? So test for strength and cogency. Answer is strong, because the conclusion would probably follow from the premises. And with this one, cogency can't be determined, because I don't know, what neighbor are we talking about, right? How can you answer if this is true unless you absolutely fit this criteria? You know what I mean? Some cogency issues you're just not going to, especially for like examples like we're doing right now. This example is intended to just show you how just a quick change of verbiage or a few swaps of terms can alter everything. So cogency in this one doesn't matter, or better yet, it's just indeterminate. What neighbor are we talking about? The headline of today's New York Times said that a tropical storm has hit the North Pole. So, it must be the case that this indeed happened. By the way, this is an argument from authority, but let's do it. Pretend like that's true for a moment. And then if this is absolutely true, would this conclusion follow? Right? Really, this being an argument by authority, what you're going to ask yourself is the New York Times a trustworthy authority? Like if you picked up a New York Times and the headline said, tropical storm has hit the North Pole, are you warranted to believe that? And I'd say the answer is yes. So this particular argument, oh, whoops, I'll let you work it out. This argument is strong because the conclusion probably follows from the premises, but it's uncogent because there's a false premise. Right? If this were true, this would follow. Strong. Then you go back for the cogency check. I can almost guarantee you there's never been a time when a tropical storm has hit the North Pole. This has got to be false, so false premise. So we got all those strong. This argument is uncogent. A few days after I helped polish the statue of Jesus at Point Loma Nazarene College, I found $1,300 in a Bible. Conclusion, I was probably meant to keep it. So go ahead. Pretend that that's true of me, for instance. Would it follow that I was intended to keep it? Answer's weak, because the conclusion does not follow with likelihood from the premises. And it's uncogent because it's weak. Weak, hence uncogent. This is actually a true story, though. I actually did help polish this statue because I was using their library and they were out there polishing it, so I was helping. And then I did find $1,300. It's a weird story, but I'm not warranted to draw the conclusion, nor is anybody else, not in logic land at least. Four of the bottles in this 6-bottle case of wine have been just perfect, so most likely it's a good case of wine. If this were true, would that follow? And if so, then what about cogency? So this argument is strong because the conclusion probably would follow from the premises. And again, like that first neighbor example, cogency can't be determined with this example. What wine are we talking about? Does it even exist, etc.? Right? If you've got a 6-bottle case and 4 of them have been perfect, you're warranted and justified to draw this conclusion, that most likely it's just a good case of wine. Again, this is a generalization, by the way. The psychic medium at the swap meet told me that I will meet my soulmate this afternoon. I bet it will really happen. Imagine if this really happened to you. Assume it's true. Can you draw that conclusion? Answer is weak because the conclusion does not follow. Uncogent because weak. Weak, hence uncogent. Well, there we have it. That's little bit of exercising and working out strength and cogency with some very simple examples. We're going to build on and elaborate upon these concepts in a future video.